I'd like to introduce Tom Ryerson to you. Tom is a writer here in Woodstock, Ontario. He's got several books out and he's got a number of different things that he's done, so we're going to just jump right into it. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay, and I thought maybe we'd start with what you did when you were fresh out of high school and went to college, and what did you go to college for?
Film production.
Tell us about that.
Basically, I wanted to make movies. I was influenced by Steven Spielberg and George Lucas and those type of fellows, and I decided I wanted to make movies like that. So, against the judgment of my family, who said it wasn't a good idea, I should take something more solid. I took a 2-year course in film, and it was a good experience, but of course I've never used any of it.
Well, so. I'm just wondering, as you're saying this, if you have, because there's one person whose blog I read, and she has done a whole series of the link between writing and setting up your scene for writing and setting up your scene in film. Have you thought about that?
Well, I guess in that respect, yeah. My first couple of books I wrote almost as films. Like I saw them as a film in my mind, and as I wrote the scene, I could see the scene playing out. Mm-hmm. And that was almost a problem with my first book, Travelogue, because it was almost like a script. Yeah. So I had to tone that back a bit. Yeah. And that was the film school kind of creeping in, unbeknownst to me. Yeah,
yeah. Well, we're all a product of all the things we've done and learned in our lives, aren't we? So your latest book has come out, and you've got it here.
Yeah.
This is A Grave Reckoning, and I think it came out in January of this year.
Oh, close, April 22nd.
Oh, well. I was only off by 3 months, right? Anyway, tell us about Grave Reckoning.
Grave Reckoning is the third installment in the Castle Lake series. It's still its own standalone book. You could read it without reading the other ones, because I think I give enough information in this book that you could get away with it. But the first Castle Lake book was in the ghost story horror genre. The second Castle Lake book was more of an adventure and mystery. And my readers didn't really like it as much. So I knew I wanted to do a third book. So for the third book, I went back to the ghost story, and more so.
Now, you're not going to tell me that you're one of these people that can see ghosts and...
No,
yeah.
I don't believe.
I just finished reading a book about somebody whose family was very sensitive to that sort of thing, and certain ones in the family could feel people there and so on. And I mean, I like to be open-minded, but I don't feel that. Yeah, so the other thing is that I wanted to know about... I read on the web that you wrote about your great-grandfather, and can you tell us a little bit about him? Particularly, he was on the Titanic.
Yes, he was a true adventurer. He was on the Titanic, he was in the Boer War, he was in the First World War, he was a homesteader in Northern Ontario. He did it all. And I think, I always knew he had an interesting story, but I think because it was my own family, I just thought it was too local or too personal, or not interesting enough. Yeah. And I was told that story back in 1982. And when the 100th anniversary of Titanic came up, I had my cousins tell me I should write his story for the anniversary of Titanic. And I looked at it, I just didn't know how to write it. I didn't want it to be just a boring, my great-grandfather was born this time, he did this, and he did this, and he did this. Yeah. I wanted to be a story. So unfortunately, I was doing other projects and I couldn't think of how to write it. And it wasn't until December of 2012, it just clicked. And I thought, I'll have my grandfather narrate the story, like he's looking back in time. So I set the story in 1930s Hamilton, and it's my grandfather, who was a teenager, reflecting back on his father's memories. And it goes back and forth between the Boer War, the Titanic, and all those situations, back up to the present, which is 1930. Now that confused some readers initially, but some other people got it.
Yeah, and so was it a success in your mind?
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely. It was. I was so glad I was able to write it, and it was received well. As I mentioned earlier, it came out in the end of March in in 2012, and in June of that year, I discovered a whole whack of new information through a British war website, and it shed some new light on some things. So it actually led to a new edition that was just released this March of the book being re-edited and reformatted. And so I was actually able to add 14 more pages to it. So,
can you tell us what was it you discovered, or is that too long a story?
There's actually things I discovered I didn't use in this version. There's things that didn't fit with the story as I told it.
Yeah.
Because it's true, but I had to fictionalize some things. And so what I did was I used what I could, and basically there's some situations that weren't as accurate as I thought they were, so I would just fine-tune them. There was some things like that.
Yeah.
It was nothing super duper, but it just, if I knew the right information, I wanted to change it.
I've had a couple of instances of that too in writing it, you know, because you research and you find all these things, and then later in doing my trilogy, so now I'm now researching and writing the third book, and I found things that impacted on the second book, and I thought, ooh, I wish I had known that when I was writing that, but it's always going to be that way, isn't it?
I actually had a reader noticed in I think it's Castle Lake 1, I have the Murdoch's barn burning down, and in Castle Lake number 2, which takes place about 6 months later, the barn, there's no mention of the barn burning.
Oh, maybe they built a new one.
Maybe they built a new one. It's like
it's every writer's
it slipped my mind totally, and then this
Yeah.
book I didn't worry about it.
Yeah, it's every writer's nightmare, and I know when you edit, you read it over and over and over, and still something will slip by. That's why we get other people to read them, right?
Well, no one caught that one.
I know, and I find that I catch more stuff than my beta readers. So, yeah, it is what it is.
But that wasn't enough to make me change it, because I mean, it's just like, it doesn't really change the impact of the story at all. So.
Yeah. But that's a nice thing about being a self-published author, that when there is something like that comes along, then you can just simply put in a new file and update the file